Hey guys, DJ here, and today I'm going to be showing you how this one scene from Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles finale contains most of, if not all, of the 12 of 10 principles of animation. First of all, the Turtles have simple but unique designs to focus less on detail and more on action. And as the fight goes on, you'll see just how well this fight uses solid design. We actually have exaggeration in the first second, where the turtle's speed is displayed. The turtle speed is displayed as them just disappearing in a cloud and leaving behind a cloud of dust. We then fo- zoom in to Shredder's eyes, where he has to move them around super fast to get a track of them. This falling scene happens in an instant, but there are actually multiple uses of principles of animation in here. Go back and comb through it. See Shredder teleport away onto the battlefield, and this is where the fight begins, with a few blurs moving around the screen, and we actually see squash and stretch here because you can because these blurs still feel like they have mass. I'm going off. As the fight goes on, this cloud of dust is kicked up, and we can see bits of squash and stretch going on as the turtles and the shredder move around and fight. This particular part has both the arc as well as anticipation. This part right here, where the shredder leaps up into the air in an arc, stopping at the top, stopping, stopping at the top for a brief moment with a few frames, and then starting to move downward stretching before stretching out and blurring before impacting into the ground. It really gives a sense of anticipation. And you'll notice throughout the whole thing, you can easily tell if the character is a good guy or a bad guy because Shredder is an obvious purple, while the turtles are all different shades of green, they're so but they're so obviously green that you can't really mistake them for anybody else. We move on, and we see arc, in and out, squash and stretch, staging, anticipation, and finally overlapping action in this scene alone. We see each other leap up into the air and spin around, where we see his ribbons, that's what I'm calling them, stretch out and twirl around him as he leaps up, stopping for a second, for a few frames, before positioning himself to land very quickly, where we see him stretch out his silhouette for causing a massive explosion of dust. And the staging comes from the camera angle, because this is all one continuous shot. And as he smashes down into the ground, the camera shakes around a bit and moves over so that we see the turtles and April. We see their reaction to the quake, as well as all of the characters behind Leonardo being pushed out of the way thanks to these giant spikes, so that we're forced to focus on him. And that's where we go to our next set of principles. In this part, we're seeing exaggeration, anticipation, in and out, and squash and stretch in less than a second. You see the camera shaking around. I guess the staging is also here. We see Leonardo strike a pose, as well as jump and spin around, letting go of one of his katanas to spin around in the air as he winds up getting ready to kick it. But instead of kicking it immediately, he spins around to build up momentum. That's exaggeration as well as anticipation. Squash and stretch is is really apparent in the katanas as he wields them. We see that as he slashes them, they also bend in an arc and extend to really get a sense of motion. As he kicks it, another sign of exaggeration, he causes a shock wave, which, as well as stopping right before and after he kicks it, disappearing as his katana flies through the air between these blades, as well as between these two chunks of rock, for a really dynamic shot. Before he reappears, grabs it, grabs it, spins around in exaggeration again, stops for a second to give the viewer a sense of action, and then throws it in just a few frames before disappearing one more time. In this next bit, we're going to talk about appeal in the character design and motion. First of all, we see the Shredder marching forward and knocking the sword out of the way like it's nothing. He doesn't see it as a threat. He is powerful. He is strong. He is strong. He is cruel and demonic. It really fits his character and what he is, which is literally, in this series, a living suit of demonic armor. He blocks away the sword, but doesn't notice Leo as he teleports behind him. But we can see a little bit of surprise in a little bit of surprise in his actions right here. His actions right here, where he reacts slightly to Leonardo disappearing from his sight, where he should be right here. And as for Leonardo himself, he's got a smile on this entire time, really cocky, and he's clearly enjoying toying around with Shredder, messing with him. And we see how carefree he actually seems as he throws it. He's got his legs out. He's very energetic, very playful. He's a bit of a joker in this show. He throws it and teleports. We see a lot of anger, but also a little bit of confusion in both the Shredder's face and his movements for a moment as he turns around just in time to get a slash across the face. If there could be audio, he'd be screaming in pain and possibly a bit in anger. And as Leo teleports to the sword that just slashed him, he says, "Cool, right?" He's clearly toying with Shredder. He enjoys basically being a bit of a bully. Shredder looks up with more anger, but also a good bit more confusion as he looks up again. It's time to be slashed in the face. He's even toying. Leo's even toying with Shredder as he throws his katana to his brother for a tag team. Shredder, in anger, tries to get a blow in, but Leo's quick thinking and has the idea to teleport to the sword he already has before, so he reappears after He grabs it with his teeth, and in one more show of absolute disrespect, he smiles, closing his eyes, throwing peace symbols before teleporting the swords, swapping his place with his brother. I'm gonna skip over Raphael's fight, so because that would go over a bunch of principles that we've already discussed. So instead, let's move on to the next two fights against Shredder, focusing on the timing. So we here Raphael reveals that he's just a clone, a hardlight clone, and we see April coming in for with a few frames, coming in fairly quickly at first, but then slowing down for a few frames to show. We're not focusing on April for this one. We're focusing on her bat. We see it clearly being moved for the first few frames, but then it skips a bunch straight towards being thrown, and we could and there are only 3 frames where we see it in the next shot. There are only 3 frames and we see it in the next shot, while there are about 5 frames after that where we can see the bat clearly in motion. Watch the whole thing and then discuss it after. So here we see the bat. We see as she grabs her bat back from throwing it the first time, she spins it around. We see it for a few seconds. We see it for a few frames, but then when she throws it, there's only 2 frames between when it leaves her hand and when it when it hits Shredder's face. And after that, there's like 10 where it flies off and back towards her, only for her to kick it where there's 0 frames between. It doesn't even show the kick. It shows the impact and the kick at the same time. Makes for a really dynamic scene where the speed of the projectile is taken advantage using as few frames as possible. And the scene following this, we also get an excellent use of camera work with staging for a unique shot. We see Shredder slicing at April for her to lean back, and the camera leans back with her. And as she stands back up, the camera leans forward as she bends forward as well, tossing the bat to the girl behind her who swings it herself. Who swings it herself into Shredder. Shredder misses the first time. There's going into timing again. There's a few frames for the build up and 0 frames against this massive arc, showing the speed. Then when it comes to the next shot, the camera works in sync with Shredder. As he's being hit, he falls into the ground head first, where we flip over with him, making for again another really dynamic shot. And then we go back to timing with Michelangelo here. We're seeing him wrap up Shredder with a bunch of chains. It may look like Shredder's struggling a lot, but that's the trick of the camera. He's only got a few frames where he's actually struggling. Let's take a look at that. As Mikey slips under him, he moves his arms out a little bit with very few motion. Meanwhile, Mikey's covering a long distance in the same amount of time to show just how fast he's going. And as he circles around his arm, there are very few frames. very few frames between distance. Meanwhile, Shredder's covering a short distance with the same amount of frames to give it to give the viewer a sense of how fast Mikey is versus how slow, relatively speaking, the Shredder is. Also get anticipation and delay where Mikey float anticipate. We also get anticipation and build up to where Mikey pulls on these chains at the beginning, but then it takes a moment only for them all to pull at the same time against the Shredder. The rest of this scene is very cool, but I believe I have already covered all 10 parts that can be explained in this scene alone. Uh, Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you go to find this show yourself. It's really cool, and I'm just gonna leave you to this scene real quick. And there we go. So, hope you enjoyed, and hope I was clear enough.